Amber Alert for a mother and two children was canceled when police say their bodies were found.
In prison without parole, that's the sentence for 27-year-old Arzel Ivory.
I'm here to tell you we discovered the bodies.
And her 4- and 5-year-old daughter.
From a lovely young mother of 3 to a dead mother of none, this is the horrifying story of 4 lives lost within the space of a month. On the other hand, it was a devastating outcome that between 2018 and 2020, domestic violence-related deaths had increased by 400%. What caused these killings? What was the offense of Jerica Banks to die in that manner? Well, follow us as we take you through the tragic journey of the horrors of apartment 5904. This is Unsolved Files, a place where true crime stories are being brought to your doorstep. What are you waiting for? Just hit the subscribe button for more intriguing and suspense-filled crime stories. Now let's get back into this story and uncover this mystery. This is the case of Amara Jerica Banks, a Milwaukee native who resides in the city's Sunset Heights neighborhood with her 3 children. Jerica attended Milwaukee School of the Arts and graduated with honors. The 26-year-old lady cherished her role as a mother to Arzel Ivory Jr., Camaria Banks, and Zania Ivory. Valeria Spinner Banks, Jerica's mother, said that her daughter sacrificed everything for her family. Everyone who knew Amara knew her as Jerica, and she was the mother of 5-year-old Zania, 4-year-old Camaria, and 21-month-old Arzel Jr., who was known as Zell to many. However, Zell and Zania's father, Arzel Ivory, resided a few kilometers away from her, but the couple lived apart. He was frequently there to visit the kids and take them to creche. Meanwhile, Jerica came from a large family of 5 brothers and sisters, a tightly connected family. Her brother David claimed that Jerica's entire existence was centered around her kids. She prioritized them above all and would work non-stop to offer them whatever they required or desired. Jerica was a gifted musician who excelled at the violin and graduated with honors from art school. She has worked even harder in the past several years to distance herself from Arzel, who told her family he hoped to marry her someday. She claimed there was no longer anything passionate between them and that the marriage wouldn't last, but she stated that she was only in contact with him because of their children. She worked additional hours in the laundry house at a nearby hospital and saved up every penny in order to move into a new flat and start afresh with her kids. Her kids, Zania and Camaria, however, were curious and mischievous, completely devoted to one another, and constantly wanting to share everything and dress alike. According to David, they were like 2 peas in a pod. At times, you might almost mistake them for twins. Zell was the cheerful one, and his sisters enjoyed playing with him and holding him around. But as soon as she embarked on this new adventure with her babies, tragedy struck Jerica and her family in a devastating and unanticipated way. Sadly, bronchitis difficulties claimed her son Zell's life soon after his 2nd birthday. Even though Jerica was devastated, she gave it her all to ensure that he had the finest farewell possible. Zell's funeral was held on February 7, 2020, and she even established a fund to assist her in paying for a funeral that was filmed for The Lion King in memory of her son. At the end of that day, after spending time at her sister's place, Jerica asked her sister to drop her off at her apartment. The family scheduled a brunch the next day, and Jerica promised to pick up her car at the same time because she left her car at her family house. During the early hours of February 8, 2020, the 3 of them returned to their flat situated in the 5904 block of North Sherman Boulevard. Just after 1:30 a.m., the peaceful atmosphere of the residential block was suddenly and terrifyingly disrupted. A neighbor heard something and then noticed a woman bleeding from her mouth as she ran across the parking lot without any shoes on. She was yelling at whoever was pursuing her not to kill her, but then she vanished, and immediately, the environment was calm. They had no idea that it was Jerica. At 1:51 a.m., a different neighbor had also heard shouting. She had heard someone pounding on the wall next to Jerica, where she lived. She described the sound as being similar to someone's head being crushed against a wall, or someone being slammed against it. She had also witnessed Jerica screaming and going barefoot, and when she peeked out her window, she saw a man trailing behind Jerica and pulling her back inside before closing the door. They called 911 right away, and the neighbor reported over the phone that she could hear screaming through the walls. She needed someone to come check on her, as he was physically abusing the girl. When the police arrived at the flat 9 minutes later, they were unable to determine the source of the 911 call. A few police officers pulled down their car windows as they drove through the complex, stopping for 10 minutes to observe. They said they heard nothing and saw nothing that would suggest a fight or conflict at home, and they drove off. The call was handled by an operator who identified it as a priority call, one that doesn't need to be answered right away. Furthermore, nothing could be tracked when the officers arrived since the dispatcher failed to provide an adequate description of the source of the noise. This was a judgment that several officials would later acknowledge was inaccurate. As hours went by and brunch approached, Jerica's relatives called and texted her to see if the plans were still in place, as well as to see how she and the girls were doing. However, she was not responding to their calls and messages. Jerica's mother, Valeria, claimed that her daughter was a creature of habit and that you could always tell where she was and what she was up to. They all had an instinctive sense that something wasn't right because of her clockwork routine. She would never have vanished from sight, not with all that had recently transpired. Her family did not waste any time in filing a missing persons report. Nevertheless, it wasn't until much later that the police ascertained that Jerica was the true subject of the early morning call. They went inside her flat to investigate, but everything was still there. No evidence of a forced entrance, and she and her girls were missing. Apart from the fact that there was a big hole in one of the bedroom walls and that the bedspread on one of the beds was missing, they noticed nothing unsettling. They also discovered a napkin with what seemed to be blood droplets on it. Most people immediately became suspicious when detectives discovered that she had not used her phone or social media account since she had been dropped off at home that evening. "This is not like my sister. She doesn't run away or disregard people. No matter what she goes through, she's going to reach out to me," said Jerica's sister.
Any reply back. She ain't been active on Facebook or anything. I've been calling her phone since the day she came up missing the last time I seen her. I've been blowing her phone up every single day. All of a sudden today, the phone is off.
Jerica's ex-boyfriend, 25-year-old Arzel Ivory, was contacted by the police while her family and friends were out looking for her and calling everyone they knew. About a day had passed since Jerica had been dropped off at her house when Arzel informed police that, when he had spoken to her previously, she had been naturally depressed about the burial and that he had spent some time in her flat before they got into an argument. He told her he preferred to sleep in his vehicle over the flat and that he had to drag Jerica back inside because she had gone outside and started screaming about it. Arzel claimed that at that point the argument had cooled off and that he had gone to his truck to get some rest before starting work the following morning. Since then, he hasn't heard from her. He admitted that he didn't know where any of them could be, and that he couldn't help the detectives right now because he would be going out of state for work the following week and could talk to them in person afterward. On the other hand, they thought his response was peculiar because he was a local security guard, and it didn't seem right that he would leave to go to work hundreds of miles away and then drive back. They were now considering the possibility that this was an abduction. Amber Alerts are triggered in the most extreme cases of dangerous missing persons or kidnappings of children. Amber First stands for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response. The goal is to immediately notify the community to aid in the search through radio, TV, road signs, and cell phones. However, the issue became so serious that Amber Alerts was thought of for prompt reaction because it had been nearly a week since the girls and their mother were last seen. Nevertheless, the majority of Amber Alerts are handled within hours due to the rapid response time and large number of observers. It was becoming apparent that a significant amount of time had already been wasted. Alfonso Morales, the police chief, defended this choice by stating that there are requirements for issuing an Amber Alert and that the investigation did not start with any suspicion of foul activity. Furthermore, he stated that Milwaukee police are only obligated to release details or images of the missing individual if they match specific requirements about age, health, and mental state. He continued by saying that they would not give up until they had located the three of them. Meanwhile, officers went back to Jerica's flat because things had just gotten serious. This time, they brought a cadaver dog, and the dog reacted violently in the girl's bedroom. Human blood was later discovered by forensic examiners within the girl's closet. In addition, the cadaver dog guided the detectives to a certain carpet in a different room. The floor beneath it was completely covered in blood when they took it out, and it soon became clear that someone had tried to clean it up because large volumes of bleach were discovered everywhere. Could it be that Jerica and her daughters were killed by Arzel, the father of her children? It seems things are just getting more serious and complicated. Well, let's continue. Now, the situation was significantly more serious than the neighbors had first believed. especially everything they had recently discovered in the flat and all they had reported hearing that night. Also, the search had been ongoing for nearly a week when Arzel's father, who was 600 miles away in Memphis, called the police to report his son. However, his son calmly admitted over the phone that he had killed Jerica, Camaria, and Zania before purchasing a gun and traveling to Memphis to have a fresh start. Authorities in Memphis got in touch with Milwaukee police, and they got an arrest and extradition warrant for Arzel, but they didn't know where the 3 missing persons were. Nevertheless, he was accused of aggravated beryl when they eventually apprehended him in Memphis.
Has Tennessee picked up the right man? Have they picked up Arzel Ivory, who's wanted in Wisconsin, or they got the wrong guy?
In other words, he assured investigators that his father's account of events was accurate and that he would provide them with the details of what transpired and the locations of the deceased. Near his former residence, on the 47th block of West Burleigh Street, police discovered the burnt remains of Jerica, Zania, and Camaria in a garage situated behind an apartment complex. They had all been set on fire after they were killed, and there had been an attempt to dismember them. Plus, subsequent autopsies verified that all 3 had been strangled. As a result, Arzel Ivory's charges were enhanced right away to include 1 case of aggravated beryl and 3 counts of intentional killing. Valeria stated that they might not have realized what had happened if Arzel's father hadn't turned his son in. Indeed, it was a terrible result. According to the police, the number of fatalities linked to domestic abuse had increased by 400% between 2018 and 2020. This specific example further demonstrated the need for additional resources and help. Without a doubt, Jerica and all of her kids were dead now, 4 lives destroyed in less than a month. The mayor of Milwaukee called the case horrible.
It is an extremely horrific.
And a GoFundMe was established to assist with the burial expenses because of the huge effect that it had on so many people. The mayor provided police with a startling timeline of events during an interview. He claimed that the couple's relationship had seriously deteriorated since losing their son, and on top of that, Jerica had held him responsible for Zell's death. In fact, Jerica has been worried about Zell since he was born because of his serious breathing problems. To aid in his breathing, he was even going to have surgery to remove his tonsils. When Arzel attempted to drop him off at the creche, they refused to take him because of his illness. The child refused to take his medication or eat anything that day. When Arzel went to wake him up from his nap, he claimed he was just lying there and making strange gasping noises. He waited over an hour before placing an almost lifeless Zell in the car and heading to get the girls from creche, choosing not to call Jerica or 911. However, baby Zell had slumped to his side and was lying against the door by the time he started driving. Arzel claimed that, not knowing what to do, he continued to drive about. It wasn't until he made a stop to get some snacks that he decided to visit the hospital, but it was already too late. Bravo, dude, you're a perfect timekeeper. In actuality, you were punctual. I mean, Zell was blue and unresponsive, and the nurses could not find a pulse in him. Only a few months after turning 2, Zell was declared dead at 5:17 p.m., having only realized he wasn't breathing correctly for the past 2.5 hours. Jerica, however, was just as upset as she was furious, declaring that she would never be able to forgive him for doing nothing and choosing to ignore what was happening to their child. After she passed away, her relatives alleged that he killed 4 of them, not just 3. Meanwhile, at Zell's funeral, Jerica had been very picky about who she invited to speak. She had asked her mother, Valeria, to speak. However, Arzel raced to the front and began speaking as Valeria was about to begin. Jerica remained silent since she knew it wasn't the appropriate moment, but according to her family, she was furious that he shouldn't even be standing there, much less speaking. After the funeral, Arzel claimed he went to work and arrived at Jerica's flat by 1:30 a.m. She was furious and yelled at him, accusing him of being Zell's killer and telling him she couldn't bear to look at him. Arzel claimed to the police that she was just creating a commotion. He said she slashed his wrist with a knife, after which he seized her and twice banged her head against the wall. This was the hole that the neighbor had heard coming through the wall and that the cops had initially noticed when they entered. She began to bleed from her lips and tried to get away, but he pulled her back inside the flat and used both hands to strangle her. He stated icily that he assumed Jerica wanted to die and was only assisting her in doing so because it didn't appear she wanted to fight him back to save her life. Can you just imagine this? Strangling a mother of 2. Who's going to take care of the kids? You didn't think of that either? Well, I guess that's why you shamefully killed your kids too. Sadly, he admitted to the investigators that he had to kill the kids as well since he didn't want them to live without their mother. Before strangling both girls, He kissed them and told them, "Daddy loves you." He also said that their mother had wanted them to be with her in paradise. Wow, it's obvious this guy's sick. However, he had intended to sever all three of them, but he changed his mind upon seeing a bone, which was probably the source of the bloody puddle. After that, he wrapped their bodies and carried them to his vehicle. While he drove around Milwaukee, unsure of what to do, he recalled that his old apartment block had a 4-car garage and one of the locks was broken. He went there to conceal their corpses and attempted to set them ablaze, but the flames did not seem to be strong enough. He then went to the petrol station to get petrol, came back to the garage, poured it all over, and lit it on fire. After purchasing the pistol, he reportedly ran away to Memphis. The police were astounded by his extreme composure when describing how he accomplished this. Arzell claimed that since he had brought his kids into the world, he could take them from it at will. After all, it was his family. The suspected murderer looked around the courtroom once, but his chances of getting off easy were low. The horrific circumstances of the incident and the cover-up brought in more than the defense's $200,000 cash bail request. However, he continued to enter a not guilty plea and was held on a $750,000 bail despite his horrifying actions. He subsequently revised his plea to not guilty by citing mental illness, but following many assessments in September 2020, a medical professional determined that there was insufficient evidence to substantiate this claim. Therefore, it was rejected as a defense. But he was given a life term in jail by state legislation. Furthermore, the judge rejected Ms. Baumer, Arzell's lawyer, request for an early release following 40 years of imprisonment. On the other hand, if one were to reflect on the specific day that the 911 call was placed, maybe things would have gone differently. The answer is definitely yes. Since the call came in early and I believe Jerica or her children may still be alive at this point, it was simply a case of neglect and incomplete information. But what do you think? Before we jump to conclusions, we want to hear from you in the comment section below. And have you seen a devoted Christian who turned out to be an evil murderer? Check out our previous video, Missing Girl Found in the Most Unexpected Way.